Welcome to Face to Face. Our guest today is Suzanne Jones. She is a writer, author of her book called There Is Nothing to Fix. Suzanne, welcome to our show, and we are very excited to have you because in some way or other, we all need to fix ourselves, and you are saying there is nothing to fix. So if you can just explain that concept, and then we will continue from there.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. The title of the book, There's Nothing to Fix, came from one of the very first groups that I worked with in my professional life. And I made this statement, there was nothing to fix. And the response from the group was, well, what now? If there's nothing to fix, what do I do with myself? And the book starts out with my own personal story of being in an emotionally abusive marriage where I believed that if I could change myself or fix myself to make my then husband happy, that everything would be wonderful. But it turns out that I didn't need to fix myself or change myself at all. I just needed to recognize that I was believing the things that he was telling me, and that's what was causing me so much distress. So I began to do a lot of research into this idea that we try to fix ourselves to fit into the world around us, to stay connected in our marriages or in our communities or in our groups, and that actually is the source of our suffering. And that's why I wrote the book.
Okay. Now, before we move further, so I have one question. How long it took you to realize that in your situation with your husband, that you know what, there is no need to fix myself to fit in? How much time it took for you to realize that?
I would say probably more than a decade.
Well, yeah, I think sometimes it takes even longer than that to realize, because we are, so much, we are trying hard to make things work, and sometimes it just, it takes time. So now also, this is your first book, right?
Yes, that is my first book. Yep.
Okay. We will come back a little bit later how you came up with this idea to write this book and what was the process. But in the book, you mentioned that you have to find yourself. You are always there. Now, how do you find yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Your previous question about how long it took me, and I answered about over a decade. That's in the context of my marriage. But really, what happens to human beings, every human being I've worked with, is from the very earliest moments of our lives, we begin changing our concept of who we are and where we believe our worth is from a very young age, because neurobiologically, human beings are wired to seek out connection in order to actually survive as infants. And so in order to, I'm sorry, remind me of your question. I just forgot the question.
No, the question is that how do you find yourself?
Okay, so the way to find yourself, we have to go all the way back. It's really important and crucial to go all the way back and recognize moments in your very young life that may have been impactful in your journey away from yourself. So an example of that, I give an example in the book that's pretty common, really, not a traumatic situation, but you're 3 years old, you spill a glass of milk, your parents yell at you. The neurobiology of your body perceives that as a threat. They perceives that as a potential disconnection from that person keeping you alive. So you make a lot of adjustments in yourself. You decide, make sure I don't ever do that again. Or crying is a good example. When you're told, don't cry, or I'll give you something to cry about. Sure. You believe crying makes me unlovable. So moving away from yourself starts at a very early age. So in order to find yourself, we have to go back, all the way back to where we started that journey, and compassionately understand the ways in which we moved away from the true essence of who we are.
Okay. Now, also, you talk about somatic healing program which you have. So this may be also a good time to you to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what is this somatic healing program.
So in 2010, 2011, I developed a program called TIMBO, Trauma Informed Mind Body. The program was designed for women. And when I was doing my research before the program came together, I came upon a book called Waking the Tiger by a doctor. His name is Dr. Peter Levine. And his work is all around somatic experiencing. That's his term for it, somatic experiencing. And what that means is trauma is experienced by your body and remembered in your body. Even if you don't have a memory of it in your mind, it's in your body. And the way to heal that trauma, the pathway in healing that trauma, is beginning to recognize the internal sensations of your body and use simple tools for navigating through those distressing moments, because they very often are distressing sensations. And that's what somatic experiencing is.
So can you give us an example of one of those tools?
Yeah.
Like how?
So the most accessible tool that we teach is breath. And what breath does is it helps what's called down-regulate your sympathetic nervous system, your stress response or your survival response. So in the group, we will often be having a conversation and a participant may be sharing something that you can tell that she's somewhat distressed. And we may even pause her and ask, where are you feeling that in your body? Make a connection there and take those 5 to 10 deep breaths. And that actually has a neurobiological impact on your system, those breaths. So that's the most simple and accessible tool.
Okay. And can you also, you mentioned about your group. Tell us a little bit about your group, what your group is and how it works and what it does.
Yeah, so TIMBO is, as I mentioned, for women. Now that COVID has hit, we're meeting online, and it's actually been very powerful and successful. And the way it works is there's a workbook. Actually, I have it right here. This is the workbook. Mm-hmm. And each week we read from the workbook, but it's not necessarily, we're not being instructed by the workbook. These are just things that we're reading that inspire conversation. And through that conversation, women begin to gain some insights about themselves and they relate to one another. And somebody might share an insight about themselves, and everybody else in the group is going to take that and reflect in and learn something about themselves. So it's more of a self-learning process through the program than learning from this workbook. And it's very transformational. It's astounding to me to witness this.
Okay. Now, also, I have one other, I don't understand that concept of somatic healing. If you can throw a little bit more light on that for a layperson who said, this word I've never heard, what it is, a little bit in more detail.
Well, what it is exactly is that when your body perceives that you're somehow threatened, so this could be anything from almost getting into a car accident to somebody that you love and care about telling you that they're disappointed in something you did or said. And our body responds with the stress/survival response. That sends hormones and biochemicals through our body that prepares our body to fight or flee. That's the fight or flight response. But the way we feel that is we feel that viscerally. It's distressing. So a good example of that would be your partner, let's say your wife or your husband, you're getting into an argument or they're expressing something that you did is upsetting to them. Very often we will feel this distressing sensation in the pit of our stomach, right? Right in the solar plexus. And so what we do is we teach people how to come out of their minds, come out of their thinking minds, go directly into awareness of the body and use the tool to just what we call to create space. And that gives you the opportunity to respond in a non-habitual way, to respond in a more healthy way.
So now we have been, of course, most of us who are familiar with this literature of the self-help books, etc. And we are very much familiar with this concept of mind and body. And you are talking here about that the body is equally important in terms of fixing ourselves. So if you take these two elements, mind and body, what importance you will give to mind and what importance you will give to body, or both play equally important role?
Yeah, they play an equally important role. A lot of times I give an example of the difference between human beings and animals. So an animal has all of the same neurobiological mechanisms that we do, the survival response. They have the same distressing sensations in their body, and they will often respond to those by fighting or fleeing or shaking. And what they don't have is cognition that we have. So they don't create thoughts in their mind that are usually self-sabotaging or self-critical or critical of others. So when we're talking about the importance of the mind and the body, it's very helpful to retask your mind from those self-critical thoughts or those catastrophic thoughts to being curious about what's happening in your body. And you can even use your mind to literally talk to your body. So this is the mind-body connection in relevance to what we do in Timbo. We teach individuals how to use their mind to say things like, okay, body, I feel that you believe I'm in danger. I'm going to just take a few breaths now and calm yourself down. And that's very different than what we habitually do, which is to judge ourselves or to judge other people.
Now, your publicist said that once you read this self-help book, you don't need to read any other book. So my question to you is, the market is flooded with so many self-help books, and there's always has been demand, at least during the last 30, 40 years, because people are always trying to fix themselves. And this market, this book market of self-help is going to continue. But what makes your book different than what is already in the marketplace?
I think the main thing that makes my book different is it's not really a how-to book. So a lot of the self-help books on the market have very practical, information and instructions. Here's a list of things to do, point A, point B, point C, do this, do that. And my book is not a how-to book. It's a book that my original intention was for it to replicate as much as possible the actual program, which means that the book presupposes that the reader has everything they need inside of themselves to actually experience some emotional freedom. And the book helps the readers excavate that. And that feels very different to me than an author that's saying, here's all the stuff I know, and I'm gonna tell it to you and give you a punch list of things for you to do to change your life. Very different.
No, I'm glad you mentioned emotional freedom. But if you look, we human beings, we are just bundle of emotions, always 24/7, unless we are sleeping or something. Even in sleep, we have dreams and all those things. So we are carrying these bundles of emotions. And do you think we can control our emotions? We can regulate our emotions?
Absolutely, we can.
Okay, so now just give us one insight how we can control, how we can regulate our emotions.
Well, the most important thing to know is that emotions as we think of them as human beings are a cognitive descriptor that we give them. So, for instance, if you're feeling guilt or you're feeling shame, the only reason they have those names is because we have the capacity to give them those names. But those emotions originate as sensations in our body. They originate as somatic, markers in our body. And so in order to regulate our emotions, it's important to suspend the judgment of the mind, because typically when we feel these emotions, we don't want to. We resist it, we judge it, we fight it. So there's a way in which we need to suspend all of those thoughts, all of those self-critical thoughts or outwardly critical thoughts, and go directly to the body and use these tools that have an impact directly on our body. And that is literally retraining how our body responds to any specific or particular, let's say triggers, or triggers is probably the best word.
So this is how you connect your methods to somatic healing, right? That you basically retrain your body.
Yes, there's definitely a large element of somatic healing in the program, and there's an equally large element of understanding the pathway that we have experienced individually from childhood to adulthood that has brought us to where we are today. And that helps us compassionately understand where those distressing body sensations are coming from. And that's equally important.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you one practical question, maybe a little bit controversial. Now, in the title of the book says that there is nothing to fix. But as I'm talking to you, I think, that we really need to fix a lot of things, especially our body and thinking and emotions. If you can just clarify that.
Yeah, I would say that there's nothing to fix is a response to the idea that we're somehow broken. And we're not broken. We have, if you think of our body as a computer, so when we're born, we have a basic operating system, just like you would when you get your laptop and you have just your basic operating program software that helps the computer do the most basic things. And then based on your need and your life experiences, you put programs into your computer and it operates for you specifically. Well, our bodies work the same way. So we are born with a basic operating system, and our life experiences then continue programming our body. That's useful when we're children. When we're adults, if we bring the programming with us, it actually causes us suffering. So fix is not really the word I would use, but we can update. And that's the difference.
Okay, sure. Now, I have two more questions. One is, we'll talk a little bit later about, how did you write the book and all. But before that, I wanted to ask you, what would be the 5 takeaways from your book? What are the 5 things I should really go away with this book once I read that book?
Boy, that's a good question. The number one takeaway would be self-understanding and self-compassion. Mm-hmm. Another takeaway would be the capacity to change your responses to external people or situations. The number 3 takeaway, 5 takeaways, let's see. The third takeaway would be having some compassionate understanding of the people in your life, all the people that you come in contact with. The fourth takeaway would be to feel like you're not alone, because there's a lot of stories of women in there that readers will say, I just felt like I was reading my own story over and over. And the fifth takeaway would be feeling, this I've heard, so I'm going to say that I'm confident that this is a takeaway. Feeling like you have a way to help other people, because a lot of people have read the book and then bought 5 copies to give them to their sisters and their cousins and their friends and their mothers. So that feeling of worthiness in some respects, that you have something that can help another person that you care about.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a couple of times women. So this book is not just only geared for women. Book is geared for everyone, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, before we complete our interview, just wanted to say, when did you think about writing this book? How long it took? How did you find the publisher?
Well, I really the inspiration for writing the book was that the program was the results were so powerful, mm-hmm. but it was somewhat inaccessible. I don't want to say inaccessible, but not universally accessible. And I wanted to be able to produce something that was accessible so that I could help more people. I wanted to expand the reach of Timbo beyond the groups that I was running or the licensed facilitators were running. And so when I wrote the book, I really wanted to, as much as I could, replicate the program, but also share stories of the women that have been through Timbo that I found particularly inspirational, even though they're not easy to read. And also I wanted to give some of the scientific information because it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's really the inspiration. And I really used my entire 14 years of professional experience as research that went into the book.
Okay. And so how long it took for you to really put the book together?
It really didn't take that long. I would
Okay.
say maybe 3 months to write the book, but a decade of work
Okay. And
prior to that.
you also mentioned your professional life. So what you have been doing otherwise, how you are trained in as a in a profession? What do you do?
Well, I primarily focus on Timbo right now. I don't have formal education in this field, the field of trauma, the field of women, but I have been very fortunate to be able to do a lot of self-learning, dive into the research very intensely, and have a lot of professional researchers, scholars, clinicians that have been taking me under their wing and helping educate me. And I think one of the values of that, or one of the maybe unintended benefits, is that because I'm not clinically trained or professionally trained, everything that I do, I use language that's accessible. And so people tell me that the language that I'm using is really helping them understand some of these complex ideas and concepts.
Yeah, okay. Suzanne, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I learned a lot of things today. I must say that I'm going to dive a little bit more into somatic healing.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.